Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing development of our web application, incorporating what we learned in our last lesson about exceptions. In today's lesson, we're going to be going through two different versions of the lesson. We're going to have of the web application. We're going to have a version 10.0 and a version 10.1. In the first version, 10.0, we're going to make a couple of changes to, well, first off, we've made a couple of changes to our admin site, particularly to additem.php and additem2department.php, which are our two administrator pages. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the old error handling process that we had before, and instead now we're going to use exceptions to manage error handling. We're going to include some try-catch blocks to show you, demonstrate how to use those try-catch blocks in sort of a real-world application. As part of that, we're actually going to also be creating a new admin page called error.php. Basically, what's going to happen is whenever an exception occurs on one of our admin pages, either additem.php or additem2department.php, it's going to catch that exception, and then what it's going to do is the application is going to redirect the user to this error.php page, which will output an error message. So actually, let's go take a look at, first of all, let's look at our old additem.php page. Basically, the way we've done our error handling is we have an error flag and an error message variable that we use when we encounter an error. For example, if the if there was an error adding the item to the store, for example, then we set the error flag to true, and we say like the data provided for the new item was invalid. And then down here in our output section, we test to see if the error flag was set, and if it was, then we skip the output, our typical output, and output the error message. What we do in our new version is, in the top, we've replaced, take a look at it. What we've done is we've enclosed everything in all of our data processing section in a try-catch block. So what we do is we enclose all of our data processing in a try block, and what we do is we create, for example, on additem.php, we create a new item. If the item is not valid, basically this isValidItem is our function that tests whether the new item has been provided all of the correct information, whether a correct image has been uploaded, and so forth. If it's not valid, then what we're going to do is we're going to throw an exception that basically says the data provided for the item was invalid. Then we're also, when we try to insert the item into the store, another exception can occur if there's an error with the insert item function. So if insert item returns false, then what we're going to do is we're going to throw an exception that says there was an error adding an item to the store. Well, because we have a try block, we also have a catch block associated with that. This is going to catch either of these exceptions. So if either of these exceptions occur, it's going to catch the exception, and it's going to be accessible by our variable e, which we can access within the catch block. And basically what we're doing is we're using the header function that, when used with the location header, allows us to redirect the user to a new page. So if an error occurs, we catch the error, and then we're redirecting the user to error.php. And basically what we do is we're providing error.php via a query string. We're providing it a get variable called error, and we're simply providing the message that was in whatever exception was caught, and we're a URL encoding it. So if we look at error.php, what it does is it processes a get variable at the very beginning, which it tests for the error get variable, which is provided in our query string. And then if an error message was provided, meaning the error get variable was provided, then what we go ahead and do is we output the error message if one exists, and if not, we just say an error occurs. Like, for example, if somebody had just randomly gone to error.php. The same thing happens for additem2department.php. In our old version, we had our error flag and our error message variables that we used to report errors. If there was an error adding the department, we set the error flag. If there was an item ID or department ID was invalid, we set an error, and then basically in our output section we test if an error has occurred, and if so we output a message. Well, again, similarly what we're doing in this new updated version, version 10.0, we're encapsulating our data processing section at the beginning of the file in a try block, and basically anytime an error occurs, for example, if the addition of the item to the department was not successful, we're going to throw an exception that says there was an error adding an item to the department. Excuse me, if some of the data provided on the form was invalid, meaning that, for example, like the item or the department ID provided is not a valid item ID, then we're going to throw an exception that says the data provided on the form was invalid. Again, we have an associated catch block, and we're going to it's going to catch an exception, and it's going to associate it with the variable here. Again, we've chosen E. And again, we're going to redirect the user to error.php and simply provide via the get variable error, we're going to set the get variable error equal to the message encapsulated on an exception object. It's going to forward it to the error page, and the error page is going to have the same output. So if we go and take a look at our Educator store, and we look at the admin website, here's our add item page, and let's say we try to add a new item. But let's say we don't provide an image. Let's provide an image. Let's say we don't provide a description, and as we know from working in our web application before, all of these are required fields. So what's going to happen is when add item is processed, it's going to test all of these data fields in the isValidItem function, and what's going to happen is it's going to return false because we didn't provide a description. So this exception is going to get thrown that says the data provided for the new item was invalid. The exception will get caught, and we're going to get redirected to error.php. So when we go ahead and click add item, it's going to direct us. If you look at the browser at the top, it's directed us to error.php. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the text big enough. You can see that the error message was appended as a query string, and we've set the error get variable equal to message that says the data provided for the new item was invalid. And then you can see here that our page actually goes ahead and it accesses that exception message and outputs it on the page. And the same thing works for add item to department when, for example, an error occurs in adding the item to the department. The other thing that we've done is we've also added in our data file class, we have an open method which is used to open the particular data file. For example, items.txt, departments.txt, or lastadded.txt. And when we open the file, a file open error might occur. And if that occurs, then it's sort of fatal error in a way in that our application is not going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to handle that, whereas before what we did in a previous version of the application is just output an error that says directly to output that says there was an error opening the file. Now what we're going to do is use exceptions to handle that error. So basically what we do is we're updating our open method so that rather than outputting an error message, it's going to throw an exception. Then whatever method calls our open method is going to surround the call with the try catch block so that it can catch that exception that occurs if there's an error opening the file. So for example, if we go and look at our documentation for, let's blow this up a little bit, for data file, and if we look at the open method, we can see that what we've done, and actually let's go ahead and open up the old version as well. If we look at the open method in our old version, basically if there's an error opening the file, we output an error message that says there's an error opening the data file, and we simply output that to standard output, which is going to be output to the user. Well, instead, in our new version, what we actually do is when an error occurs, we actually throw an exception. And what happens when that occurs is execution of that function stops, and it goes, whatever method called this open method is going to have to handle this exception or catch this exception. So here we have, for example, if the file handle property was null, meaning that an invalid file name was provided in the constructor to this data file class, it's going to say, formatting's a little messed up here, it's going to say that there was an error opening the particular file. Excuse me. And then actually what that's going to do is it's going to say that's going to throw an exception if there was actually an error in the call to fopen the file. Down here, it actually throws an exception if the file name was not property was not properly set, meaning that you provided an invalid file name to the file. So then what happens is in, for example, all of our functions in our file library that use the getOpen method now are going to basically enclose things in try-catch blocks. So for example, in our getItem function, which loads an item from the database, what we do is we declare a new data file object, and then what we do is we try to open the file. And what we have done now is enclose that in a try block. And what happens is we catch the exception, and then right now we're simply returning false. We're not outputting any error message, which is different to our last version, in which getItem, in which what we did is when we called the open method, we actually enclosed it as a test for our if statement, because open will return true or false, and if it returns false, then we can say, okay, we're going to return false from the method. What we've done in our new version now is used a try-catch block instead. So rather than enclosing this in an if test condition in between the ifs parentheses, we simply, if it doesn't throw an exception, it's going to continue processing or continue executing the code in the rest of the function. If an error is thrown, then it's going to know that an error was thrown, and it's going to return false. And what we're going to see in the next version of our application is we're going to show a way to basically log that error so that we can find out information about it. Right now, all that happens is when a user tries to get an item, for example, when you go to item.php and it tries to load the item from the database, if there's an error opening the items.txt file, for example, all this method is going to do is return false, and it's basically not going to allow you to load the item. But it doesn't really provide any information to the user. Before, in our old data file class, we actually had in the open method, we actually output an error message stating that you couldn't open the file. But that doesn't look very good if that happens. It just outputs a random error message to the user. So what we're going to do is we're not going to output an error message. In our next version of this web application, we're going to show you how to sort of log that message so that it handles the error gracefully, doesn't show an ugly error message to the user, but yet you still see that the error occurred. So basically all of our functions that use that open method, for example, get departments, they all enclose the call to the open method within a try block, and then they catch any exception if it occurs. So actually what we've done in a new version of 10.1 is we've added a little bit of a feature, added a feature to our web application that involves what's known as a logger. And there's libraries out there that you can use that have basically are logging libraries that allow you to insert statements in your code that allow you to log errors or warnings or debug statements that basically help you, enable you to debug your code. We've created for this a simple logger class. It's a new class. It basically actually makes use of our data file class, and what it does is it opens a log file, and it has a couple of static methods in it, for example, log error and log warning, that when you call these static methods, you pass as a parameter, you pass some message, and then what the logger class will do will add that message to a log file. And what you can do, so for example, we have a file open error because we're not outputting that message to the user anymore. We can log it to this log file, and then when we have a problem with our web application, we can look at the log file and it'll provide information as to where things went wrong. As part of this, we've updated config.php with some log-related constants. So if we look at config.php, we can see that we've added a log directory constant. Basically what we've done is just add a logs directory, a directory called logs to our document root, or to our web root for this particular version of the web app. And then we've also created a constant called log file, which basically is the name that we want to use for our log file. In this case, we're going to call it log.txt, and it's going to be stored in this log.dir directory. So if we actually go and look at this new class, logger, actually let's go look at the source code for it, we can see that it has two static methods. It has one called log error. It has one called log error and one called log. And basically what it does is when you call the log error function, basically what it does is it takes whatever message you pass to it, appends a statement that says this is an error, and then calls another static method that's a part of this class, which actually goes through the process of opening a data file, which is going to be the log file. It's going to open the file and append the message to it. One thing that it also does is it adds a date timestamp to the beginning of the message. So when it logs it, it's going to say, it's going to have a date timestamp, it's going to say error, and then it's going to have whatever message you include in there. So now what's going to happen is whenever we throw an exception, for example, we catch an exception, or we throw an exception when we try to open, for example, items.txt using our open method of the data file class. It's going to throw an exception, whatever method, for example, maybe in file, in our file library, the getItem method, it's going to try to open the items data file. Well, when it throws an exception, now what it does is when it catches the exception, instead of just returning false, it's going to make a call, a static call to this log error function that basically is just outputting that passes it the message contained in the exception. So for example, in this case, because we're trying to open items.txt, if there's an error opening that file, the exception that's thrown is going to say there was an error opening items.txt. Here we're appending a little information to it that's stating that this error occurred also in the getItem method of filelib.php. Then we call the log error method, which is going to call log error, which is going to append an error message to it, and then it's going to go ahead and write it to our data file. So for example, if we take a look at, if we take a look at our website, blow it up a little bit. This is our version educator store, version 10.1. We can see that it works as normal if we look at our home page. Basically, when our home page is loaded here, it's actually loading information about all of the different departments in order to output, for example, this left navigation bar. So it accesses departments.txt. Well, let's say that we were to go and rename our file for this version departments.txt and call it departments.txt2. Now what's going to happen is when we try to, when this page loads, it's going to try to open that department. It's going to call getDepartments function, which is going to create a data file object, which is going to call, and it's going to call the open method on that data file object. It's going to try to open departments.txt. It's not going to be able to, so what it's going to do is it's going to throw an exception. The getDepartments method will then catch that exception, and if we look at our getDepartments method, we can see that now when it catches that exception, it logs the error to our log file. So if we go ahead and try to do this now that we've renamed our file, we refresh the page, here we can see that we get an error, so we know an error occurred, and that we can handle this a little more gracefully, but the main purpose of doing this is to show the use of our log file. What we can actually do is if we look at version 10.1, there's a logs directory, there's a logs.txt file, and if we go and look at it now, we can see a date timestamp that says an error occurred at 20 hours and the 20th hour, 57 minutes, 37 seconds of the 2nd of September. It's going to say an error occurred in the getDepartments method of filelib.php. It's going to also say that the error occurred before that, it occurred in the open method of datafile.php. And then here's the message that was contained in our exception that we threw. There's an error opening file, and if we look at this, departments.txt. And the reason that this method, this shows up twice is because actually on our home page, we try to load, we call that get departments method twice, and we try to output the different departments here as well as within our left-hand navigation bar. And so that's how our logger file works. And basically what it does is it allows us to provide some information that doesn't get sent to the user, but that we can look at our log file and debug things. Also what we've done is for the close method of our data file class, that can generate an error as well if there's an error with the closing the file that we have open. However, because we've already extracted what information we need from the file, it's not necessarily a fatal error. So we're going to log it. In this case, we're going to log it as a warning using a log warning method, which is also part of the logger class, which basically appends a warning message to it. And if we go and look at our logger class, we can see that we have a log warning function that basically does the same thing as log error, except it allows us to basically it just appends a warning to whatever warning message we pass. So actually if we go and look at our data file class in the close method, whereas before we just had an echo statement that would echo there was an error closing the file. Now what we do is we call our logger and we have a log warning that says there was an error closing so-and-so file or whatever. And so that way we can at least look at our log file and find out if there was an error closing the file, and that's a way to sort of keep track of things. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.